Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Let the Right One In. A great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, I gotta bring up something that if I don't bring it up now, I'm afraid I'm gonna forget about it. There's a shot, somewhat near the end of the episode, jumping ahead a little bit, where Mark is staring at the gallon of blood. He turns around. It's a shot of a pan up from the gallon of blood. There's a hand-drawn picture in the background of Monokuma. Now, if you're unfamiliar who Monokuma is, he's from a video game series called Danganronpa. I literally had to pause the episode. I was like, wait, did I see it's like, no, it's definitely supposed to be Monokuma, because Monokuma has a very distinct look. He's a black and white bear, and on the right side is a very distinct right eye, and that's the only side of his face that has that very distinct, his teeth are only there, his very distinct design. So I was like, which immediately I'm like, wait, is that supposed to imply Ellie's a Danganronpa fan? Which I was like, oh, that's interesting. And the reason why it's also significant, I'm like, well, for one, I wonder is that something that was placed there because someone on a part of this production, whether it's a cast or crew person, is a fan of the Danganronpa series, and I think there's a parallel you can kind of make, considering what Mark had to do. Because if you're unfamiliar with the Danganronpa, it's a visual novel video game franchise. It's basically a murder mystery whodunit type of situation. And there's almost a little bit of a parallel where it's there's a mystery of trying to find the creature who bit Ellie, but also Mark having to cross that line and kill someone and getting away with it, which that's kind of that's an element of Danganronpa too. It's you're kind of trying to murder people and get away with it. It's the only way you get out of the Danganronpa situation. I don't want to spoil it for anyone that doesn't know the full context of the Danganronpa games, but yes, there's a very distinct parallel there. I'm gushing about it, but that was just the craziest thing to me. Because I was laying down and I was like, am I crazy? Did I see what I saw? I rewound and I paused it, and it's freaking Monokuma, dude. Holy shit, dude. That was, I don't know why that got me. And the fact is they made a point to show it too. It was very visible in a shot for a couple of seconds. So I was like, yeah, that was super on purpose. And yeah, like I said, sitting here thinking about it, I'm like, there is parallels you can draw between Mark's circumstances in that situation and drawing the parallels to Danganronpa. That's so crazy. Because I'm like, yeah, by that point in time, because this is probably about roughly supposed to be 20, because it's probably present day, 2022, maybe going into 2023, maybe, or it's 2021 going into 2022. But it's roughly around that time. I'm like, because I don't know what the turnaround for the translation for that was. I don't know if that came out 2009 in Japan and the translation came out 2010, or I think the first game came out 2010. I'm not going to worry about it. It's details that don't really matter, but I'm sure at least the first one was out by then, at least here in the stateside. Either way, I spent enough time gushing about that, but I just thought that was the craziest thing ever. But yes, this episode is pretty much what I hoped it would be based on where last episode left off. The entire episode is us rewinding 10 years, kind of finding out, seeing that journey of what led to everything. And obviously we're not going to get the full 10-year gap, but we are going to find, this gives us the idea of what set Mark on his path to do what he's doing. So obviously getting introduced to the family, first and foremost, obviously back when things were nice and happy. And I even love that little bit between Mark and Ellie where it's all right, she's trying to guess all the flavor, all the ingredients based on the flavors. And she pretty much nails it. I love the whole thing of one of the ingredients is love. And Zeke's like, are we really counting that now? Love is actually an ingredient now? It's yeah, when it tastes good, yeah. But sadly, Ellie's outside and she's looking at the stars, and later on, and the creature attacked her when she was alone. It waited perfectly until she was alone, and then obviously she's about to get dragged away, and I was like, oh, because that was my biggest question. Why didn't it kill Peter and Ellie? Once again, I'm unsure, but it seemed like the only addresses it got were Peter and Ellie. Maybe because they're children, it would have been a little easier. Maybe they're not full-grown adults, so they're going to be easier to find. That's why I was maybe the person who did it is a predator, or it could just be no, they're smaller animal, they're smaller prey. That might be what that comes down to. But my biggest question was why did it stop with Ellie and Peter? And it turns out, it seems like it was interrupted when it was trying to get Ellie. So I was like, oh, I guess the same thing applies in Peter's case as well. Either way, they take her to the hospital. They're trying to keep an eye on her, and then just you see the change of like the sunlight burns her, and she's just like, oh, like I kind of feel like crap, and they're trying to give her the food, but she can't even taste anything, can't even keep applesauce down, and they're trying to figure out. And then we find out the doctors are the ones that gave them the idea, because it's like, right, in these cases of like whatever animal attacked you, it most likely had to have had this very specific disease, and maybe it has the antibodies in it. So the idea wasn't 100% theirs. They actually got it from a doctor, and treating this like a casual, how you would any other normal like animal attack situation in this regard. I even love they had the guy come in and be like, oh, like the fact of the matter is, whatever did, like your daughter saw these eyes is basically night vision, and it's like, well, a very specific like thing with the eyes, and it's like, well, as he says, like the more layman's term name of it is cat eyes, and he's like, yeah, like deers, ferrets have it, and he's like, but this most likely wasn't a ferret. It's like, if anything was going to do that, they're like, oh, it could be a coyote, but he's like, yeah, but how many coyotes do you know that are in a tree? And he's like, well, we don't really have much experience with coyotes, but it's like, if anything, it was like a mountain lion, and it's like, right, it was going to drag her to its den to feed on him, and the guy's just like, honestly, I have no idea what attacked your daughter. And I do love that the only reason why they were figuring this whole thing out, because Ellie wasn't doing good, she was obviously looking pale, and nothing was being kept down. It's not until they were, because Zeke's the first one to notice, like, because he was in the room with Ellie and he saw her eyes, he was almost like, what the And then, while Mark and Elizabeth were praying, he saw Eleanor's teeth. He's like, give her the blood, give her the blood. I was like, okay, Zeke's on this. It makes sense, because Zeke was even talking about the fact that he wanted to show Eleanor. He's like, yeah, she's old enough to see The Shining. He's like, yeah, it messed me up for weeks because I was about the same age when I saw it myself. So he has the horror movie experience. And so, like, I mean, a lot of vampire material doesn't shy away from it. Obviously, I feel like Walking Dead's the only one that really leans into the whole, like, oh, we have no idea, like, we kind of make it seem like we don't know what a zombie is in that universe. That's kind of how they treat it, right? Most vampire material I've seen, I mean, I think Interview with the Vampire is an exception, because, like, it was the 1900s. It was, like, early 1900s when Louis got turned, so, like, the term vampire probably didn't really mean it. But, I mean, maybe he had read some literature that existed at the time. I don't know. But, like, he will be a little more forgiving, like, but obviously everything I'm currently watching kind of, like, yeah, it's like vampires are a known commodity. You know, it's in a pop cultural zeitgeist, especially, that's how Zeke recognized the lines of, like, when he saw the teeth, he's like, give her the blood, give her the blood, and he's like, oh, she's doing better. I even love later on, like, they're removing all the crosses from the house, and Zeke's like, you know, like, I'm basing all this on movies I've seen that, honestly, I really don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. And it's like, I love that, though. That is like, yeah, he kind of became the expert in that moment. But now, knowing what her circumstances are, they're immediately like, now we got to take her home. Oh, she's doing great. Oh, that's fine and dandy, but we're taking her home. It's like, no. She doesn't need to stay in a hospital for you to be running tests and finding out there's something off here. Like, no. Let's take her home. Luckily, and I don't know if that came up previously, that Elizabeth is a nurse. So she was able to say, like, right, no, we can take our daughter home, especially because I am a ICU nurse. So I guess, like, having a medical professional on standby, like, it's like having a parent who is like a medical professional means, like, no, she's legally being taken back home, but she's also in the care of someone with medical profession. I think that's where you can kind of get around the legal loophole. So I'm like, which makes me go like, huh. So if I was ever in a situation, could my mom ever pull that off, considering she's a registered nurse? I don't know. I guess, like, that kind of gives you enough, because it'd be like, you'd have to say, like, right, I guess we're hiring a registered nurse or whatever to be there to look after a child. But it's like, since I am because I am a nurse, because I work in the ICU, because I have medical experience, I can fill that role. So you are legally putting her in someone's care that has a medical background, not just her parents. So I think that's kind of like the stipulation there, because the doctor couldn't really fight back there in that moment, because I guess, like, that kind of presented an opportunity where it's like, it presents a situation where it's like, she's legally allowed to go home without you having to be too concerned about it. I'm sure you could still fight it and be like, no, but to ease the doctor's mind, I think Elizabeth had to press the point of, yeah, I'm a doctor. So And I don't think we've seen that now. I'm sure there is, and I'm not well versed in all my vampire fiction. That was wild as hell. When like the moment she stepped through the house, I was like, well, it is technically her house, so like, is she gonna have issue? And it's like, well, to be fair, she had issue before him, but I was like, well, I mean, she had to get Isaiah to break into her house and to invite her in a couple episodes ago, so that's why I was like, well, it's new ownership now, so like it makes sense. But it's like, no, even now that's applicable, because I guess it's like, technically speaking, it's not her house anymore. Because I mean, it's not her house, it's her parents' house, because they're technically the owners of it, so I guess that's the justification of it. But I guess like the moment she became dead, it's like every property, even one that you are always welcomed in, like is null and void until you are fully welcomed in. And it can, I guess, I wonder if this hasn't really touched on it, but I'm curious, is it going to be a thing of you can't always revoke that welcome in? Because I think True Blood and the Vampire Diaries universe have touched on that. Because in the Vampire Diaries, to my recollection, it's just a magical barrier makes you stop from going in. It wouldn't even be possible for you to be in. And, you know, I think there, like I said, I'm trying to remember with True Blood as well, whether it was a situation of like, if they revoked it, you just magically get thrown out the house. I want to say that happened maybe in the Vampire Diaries and, True Blood, but it's been so long I actually don't remember that, because it didn't come up that often, you know? But her bleeding from everywhere, her eyes, her mouth, her like ears, her forehead, she was bleeding everywhere. And Zeke's the one that's like, Eleanor, you're invited in, and it's like, wow. Then we also found out about the rules. It's like, cool. And now I love this because it's something I didn't think about back in episode 1 or 2. When Claire and Peter's dad, Arthur, had said like, hey, I have a blood bank situation. I mean, obviously we found out later on it was BS, but in retrospect now I'm like, oh, of course it's BS, because we're like, right, we found out not last episode, but the episode before last, that there's a time limit in between, like, it has to be fresh blood that they get. So it's like, yeah, like, because she's a nurse, she tried to like steal like some, packaged blood, but it's like, no, that's not going to work. It needs to be fresh blood, because a lot of stuff actually, I mean, once again, a lot of things have different vampire rules, because some things will make it like, no, blood bags are fine, because it has to be like a vampire will drink like a whole bunch of blood bags, and it's like, oh, it's because like, it's more like, oh, fresh blood is, it's a preferred, but blood baths can work too. It's like, in this case, it's like, no, Ellie can't even keep down animal blood, or either just animal blood just isn't enough just because of the size of them, but like a blood bag is a no-go because it needs to be fresh blood. That's the only thing she can keep down. Because we found, there was like the time limit when Zeke was rushing to bring her the blood. I was like, that's so interesting. But like I said, in retrospect, it's like, yeah, and it also adds to that. I should have thought about it before this episode to be like, oh yeah, that would make sense. So Arthur's story, like, because at first I was like, maybe he started off with blood bags, but then the situation ran out. It's like, no, blood bags were a no-go for a while. But the whole point was he was trying to ease Claire into the whole thing of like, yeah, we kind of have to bring your brother live victims, because he needs that blood pretty damn fresh. So it's like nothing fresher than a live victim, because it's like you don't want to put yourself in a situation like Mark where he has to drain someone, rush to get back. It's like, might as well bring the food to the person. Makes it a little easier. Plus they have a whole situation that allows them to basically keep someone captive until they need Peter. Like, Peter has enough solitude and a basement facility area to make that happen, so it's easier than Mark's circumstances, because Mark doesn't have that he doesn't have that situation. But I do love, because she is a nurse, Elizabeth has, once again, I love when you handle vampirism from a scientific point of view. She's like, all right, she's trying to figure out, like, okay, so, like, this is how much blood I gave, this is how much blood Mark gave, this is how much blood Zeke gave. It's not enough, because she was basically doing the math. She was like, okay, so you're going to need about 15, I think she was saying like 15 liters or something in like 30 days. It looked like that was a 1.5, but maybe not, because it was like, she was initially doing like 1 liter, like last about 2 days is kind of what she was saying. So it's like, right, so Ellie would need about, she's like maybe 15 liters, but it's like at bare minimum that Ellie would need about 5 liters of blood to survive for basically a calendar month. And then she had slash person. So I was like, is that implying she would need basically a full body of blood, which we've seen has been the case. But I was curious, so I did look into the math a little bit. So roughly speaking, this is based on some Google like conversion rates and stuff like that. So it might be off. But what I saw is basically the human body is 1.2-ish to 1.5 gallons of blood for an adult. Basically, a liter, 1 gallon is about, no, 1 liter is about 0.264 of a gallon. That's how much a liter is. So 0.264 of a gallon. So, putting that together with 5 liters is about 1.3 something gallons of blood. So you're like, oh, so like the math tracks. She basically needs a full grown adult body's worth of blood for it to be enough for her to survive. So that's why they probably they're initially like feeding her little by little. They're trying to give her basically a liter every other day. The human body doesn't produce enough blood for that to be possible, because that's not enough time for you to replenish your blood. And especially if they're having it, even rotating, it's still not enough. And as the episode goes on, you see the amount of blood they're able to give, because if you don't, like, you drain too much blood, you're going to kill a person. So you have to leave enough blood so that the person doesn't die or pass out. So it's less and less blood as the episode goes by, even as they're rotating. Once again, especially considering they have to feed her every other day. Hence why Mark goes on a more path of let's do it in one mass feeding. So I just thought that was so interesting. Like I said, seeing and actually looking at, if you pause on it and you look at Elizabeth's notes on her trying to work this whole thing out. But it's just not enough, and they can't keep going at this rate. And even she had done the math pretty early on before we even got to the point where they couldn't produce enough blood. She already knew it wasn't going to be enough. She already knew just the rate of, for medical experience. The human body can't produce enough blood in that time or replenish enough blood to make up for that. So she's like, our daughter will eventually starve to death. So it's going to be about 3 months, 2 to 3 months maybe. And Mark even says later on, the moment Elizabeth told her that's when he started rummaging through his mind. Because he starts trying to, hey, we got to track this creature. Which I love. At first, him and Zeke find out, all right, the creature, it's right, there's no way the creature could live in a place, because it would have to, it would have the same issue that Eleanor has of you have to be invited in. So there's that. So maybe it had a van or car waiting, and then they found out the sewer situation. They followed it, but then it goes to the subway, and it's this thing could be anywhere in the city, could be anywhere by now. So it leaves them well, where do we look? So Mark starts tracking all the past attacks in the past year. Obviously, it's this person died, and he's at least one of these has to be maybe someone who is a victim of this. And lo and behold, who does he run into? Because they were within the vicinity and everything, within the scope of where he was initially looking. I mean, even if he had found out about Claire and Peter, because obviously this is at the time where Claire just found out my brother's dead. She has, once again, this is 10 years ago, so she only just found out 2 months ago, present day. Well, roughly a couple months ago, present day, about the truth about everything. But even if they had known, neither one of them had been able to track down that creature. I mean, hence, her father has been working at this for 10 years. So I think that speaks volumes, but it's so close. But the fact is, I don't know if Claire would remember him if they saw each other again. He might remember her, because he might remember okay, these are all the places I checked. If they run into each other again, it's he's wait, I know you. And she's maybe she won't remember him, but he's yeah, your brother was and then piecing it together. So I was that's because I was oh man, they've had their misconnection moments, and it's interesting to know that you were so close to someone else who had been through that same thing. I thought that was a really nice touch to be no, he's crossed paths with them, but obviously they were our son, Peter died, we leave us to grieve, so he wasn't going to open up that can of worms. But it's now in retrospect, Claire might be wait, why were you coming to us? And it's now it's when they eventually do meet face to face and it all comes out, it's oh, it makes sense. You were searching just like we were. So it's only a matter of time before those paths fully cross again. But there was also this one guy that that Mark kept looking at. I was like, what's that about? It didn't even cross my mind. I was like, of course he's like finding a person to hunt down because Eleanor's got less and less time, and once again, they don't have enough blood to keep her satiated. So he brought this up to Zeke, but Zeke was like, no, I'm not going to help you, which obviously is the whole point of like 10 years time, seeing Eleanor again, changed his mind of like, yeah, I'm going to do whatever I got to do to help you out, because yes, we are brothers. But back then it's like, I am your brother, so I'm going to try and stop you. And he's bringing it up to Elizabeth, but he's also like, yeah, but I am going after a shitty human being. That's why he's like, this guy's on the sex offenders registry. The world's not going to miss him. He's a shitty human being to begin with, so you're justifying. That's also why Zeke later on, when it came to Frank, he was like, was he a bad guy at the very least? And he was like, I hope so. And I was like, well, Frank had his issues, but he wasn't like, I mean, because it also depends on like whose standard of bad guy you're talking about. We're talking about Punisher. Like, I'm sure the Punisher would still go after drug dealers and stuff like that. You're small fries, but you're still peddling stuff that kills people. So it's like that's the whole thing of like his worst crime is like but it's like it's still like you're giving drugs to people who are getting hooked on it. Not saying Frank deserved it because he was everyone. It's that gray area, like I said, of how far on the totem pole of like, does that whole selling drugs to people, does that make him a shitty enough human being that you're like, okay, we can all get behind like, oh, he's a sex offender, oh, he raped a child, oh, yeah, he can go. Like, in the circumstances, the math is quite easy. It's still fucked up taking a human life. That's the whole thing, but especially because, like, well, in their case, it's like, it's the whole Catholic guilt thing. That's definitely going to weigh you down. But it's like, yeah, I mean, just taking a life in general shouldn't be easy. But it's like, you can justify it. You can be like, oh, I got to do the math in my head because it's one shitty life for my daughter's life. So it's like, I'm fine with that. Once again, Frank is selling drugs enough for you to be like, he's a shitty human being. It's kind of a shitty thing to do when you think about how much drugs can destroy people's lives. But yeah, you know, so that's why I'm like, it just comes down because everyone's map's a little different, you know? So I think that is kind of an interesting element to it. But Elizabeth she can get behind that math and Zeke couldn't because it's like, no. Eleanor isn't your daughter because he's like, right, I'm sorry what's happening, but she's suffering, so you need to let her go. Elizabeth's almost looking like, motherfucker, what? Oh, yeah, you say, yeah, that's not your daughter. He's like, I understand. It's like, no. If you understood, you would have never let that come out your fucking mouth. It's like, this is our child, and you're telling us to let her go. What parent would willingly let go of their child when there's a viable option? It's a sucky option, but it's still a viable option. So Elizabeth was like, okay, and obviously I guess that leans into the 10 years why they didn't speak. I mean, obviously, like, he moved around a lot. I'm assuming, like, after they buried her, Elizabeth, that's when, like, they probably moved. It's like too many painful memories. Plus, we got to track down this creature. It's probably like he probably looked everywhere in the city and it's like, well, we can't find it. Plus, with everything going down, it's like, we can't stay here. We'll probably draw too much attention. So, yada, 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 right? So, Mark was just like, get the hell out. You're not welcomed anymore. So, when the time happens, Elizabeth's like, okay, run through what you're going to do. He's like, you don't need to. No, she's like, no, you need to talk it out. He's been planning this for a while. And obviously, like, he's sloppy. You know, so the guy turned around, he was in the bathroom, like, he was just hesitant to, like, pull the trigger on the situation. Like, obviously, it's, like, not the best situation to be in because the guy bit Mark, which are like, oh, God, that's not a good thing. That's not good. That's not good. Because that guy, it's most likely, okay, so that guy, Mark didn't just, I mean, from what we know, Mark probably just left the guy there, so it's just like, the guy got murdered. I don't know how Mark staged that crime scene. But the guy most like if his body was left there, Mark didn't have time to dispose of it on his own. Especially this is early day work, so he hadn't figured it out yet. So he hadn't disposed of the guy's body. The guy bit Mark. He most likely got some flesh. Maybe. I mean, Mark was wearing like a jacket, so maybe there's only like fibers in his mouth. But if he got deep enough, there might be some like, maybe some skin, but I don't know if he bit deep enough for that to be a thing. But I'm like, the problem is, if Mark is in the system for whatever reason, that sample might still be in the system. And if he gets arrested, processed, or anything like that, it's going to connect back to that murder. That's why I feel like they make a note of that. Like, yeah. It's just a small thing, but that could easily be me reading too much into that. But yeah, like I said, it was a sloppy situation, and Elizabeth's the one that's like, you need to hold him upside down because the blood will rush to his head and everything. So, and Mark was just kind of hesitant to do it, and I guess he was going to call like Elizabeth saying like he couldn't do it, but he looked at a picture of his baby girl and it's like, I got to do it. The guy wakes up and he's freaking out. Mark just slit his throat. And it's like, all right, got to do it. The blood's draining out into the gallon. He's like, all right, did it, got to go. I got myself an hour, which I thought was interesting. I guess the time limit was meant to be like, because he gave himself like, I guess that wiggle room of like, right, it's going to take you a certain amount of time to get there. I guess maybe he was counting the time it took to gather the blood plus how long it had been outside of the body while being gathered. So I guess that's why he gave Zeke he's like, right, it's going to take about, maybe he was basically saying it's going to take about 24-ish minutes to drain the body completely of blood. And then, you have like 36 minutes to get to her. Because he had given Zeke like the 36-minute limit last time. But this time it was like an hour. It's like, oh, are you overestimating? It's like, no, like I think that's the whole total process. Because by the time and I think he had got it down to like, especially, well, the thing is, he was doing it alone this time. Because I kind of interrupted myself. My point was, he had 19 minutes when it was all said and done. So it took that long. But it's like, right, he immediately handed over to Zeke. Zeke can speed back to Eleanor. He's doing this on his own. He's like, okay, I got 19 minutes. The car won't crank. I was like, motherfucker. I was like, oh God. And then he rushes and hits a guy. I was like, fuck. He's like, God, I'll give you my insurance and everything. He's like, oh, why are you trying to run? He's like, I'm not running, dude. I'm giving you my insurance. All the cops are involved. He's like, okay, I got to go home. My daughter's sick. And it's like, damn. By the time he got there, the blood wasn't viable anymore. I was like, fuck. Because that's heartbreaking, because you're like, and I think that's impactful and important to make it the first time they went through this. Like, obviously it was sloppy and it did not work. Just everything that could go wrong went wrong, and that sucks so much. Because yeah, Mark killed a dude for nothing because all that blood went to waste, and especially because it's like, cool, I killed a dude for nothing, and also my daughter's still starving to death, and she's only got a couple more days. It's like fuckity fuck. It's like, damn, dude, that sucks. And Mark's breaking down, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna go back out there. I'll find someone else. And she's like, no, just sit, And especially when Eleanor was talking to Elizabeth, being like, will we all be together? Like, she was even saying, like, will I get into heaven? Will it all be all three of us? It's like, we'll see each other again. Because she's even like, with my situation, can I even go to heaven? And the moment that happened, and like Mark had turned around, I was like, please don't tell me she's going to do what I think she's going to do. I was like, she's going to do it, isn't she? I was like, this is how she died. She killed herself because it's like, right, she sacrificed herself. Because I was wondering if Mark was probably thinking the same thing. But then like Mark was turning around. I think for him, it's like, why doesn't she come back down? He immediately knew what she was doing. And she slit her wrist. And she had barricaded the door and fed Eleanor. And it's like, because I figured because like, once again, Eleanor said, hey, I never killed anyone. I was like, either she's lying but I maybe on some guilt level, maybe she feels like she did. Because I think maybe that also might be why she's like, Dad won't even look at me, because it's probably a reminder of, I fed on Mom. I mean, granted, Elizabeth made that choice. It's like, I'm going to give my life to make sure my baby girl's okay. And the sad situation is like, right, they didn't have time to find another perfect person to do this. And it's like, right, at the very least, this tides Eleanor over for a month. So it gives Mark a month to figure this out, but it's still like, damn, that sucks. And he had to go through it alone because he wasn't, like, him and Zeke had their bad blood. So he probably, like, eventually after whatever they, like, whether it's just immediately after Eleanor's funeral, we don't know if Zeke even showed up. I mean, he probably did. But, like, who knows where things kind of stood between them at that point in time. And maybe he even blames Zeke because he's like, if you had just worked with me, we could have made this work. I could have gotten that. And I think that is the beautiful thing. I didn't even think about that tonight because I made the whole point. But I'm like, yeah, Zeke didn't help this time. They weren't able to get the blood in time. He helped next time, and they were able to make that work. So I think that is the beautiful. I'd made that comparison, but I didn't really think about, like, oh, how they had done that. That was so beautifully executed, in my opinion. So that is sucky. But it's like, yeah, he probably blamed Zeke too, because it's like, yeah, if you had helped me out, it probably wouldn't have come down to that. And especially considering like they're a very religious family, and he'd even said like that was the last time he'd confessed was basically over 10 years ago, because it's probably before she died was like the last time they went to church, because they made a whole point of it at the very beginning of the episode that they were going to go to church, and Zeke was kind of like, no, he's not the religious person. So, like I said, in totality, this was just a great episode, a nice like kind of like origin story. I think it's so interesting because I think that's kind of a conversation about like, I think having an origin this late in the season makes it even that much more impactful, realizing because like her death had been such a like danced around subject, and now it's like, right, we know. So, and he said it wasn't a good death because they are Catholic, so that might they might be Catholic. I'm assuming I think he said they're Catholic, or maybe just, yeah, I think he said Catholic because I think she's Baptist. Isn't that what Naomi was? Maybe. Because I think I referenced early on when him and Naomi had that conversation. I want to say in episode, what's that, 3? They had that conversation. I'm like, yeah. The reason why I'm like him saying like, oh, it was a nasty death or something like that. I was like, it wasn't a good death or whatever. I'm like, because once again, I continue to attribute this to Catholics, but I think the reason why I think that is because like Constantine the movie made me think that. I don't know if that's truly applicable, but I hold it against Catholics. I'm not just the religion itself, no one who's Catholic in itself, but like the belief that if you kill yourself, you go to hell. That might be leaning into like what that's all about, but also like the whole thing of like, yeah, she slit her wrist so that my daughter could feed on her, so it's not the, so there's extra layers to it. But I'm wondering is from the religious standpoint, she did kill herself. That's also the rub of it all too, considering like, well, you did kill yourself. If they are Catholic, it was like you'd actually, if you believe in what you believe, you think you'd be going to hell. But for her, it's like, I'll go to hell if it means my daughter's able to survive until my husband figure out a way to get our daughter back. So there's like I said, extra layers upon layers to that whole situation. Like I said, if they're Catholic, I think he said they're Catholic, but I don't know. It could be. I'm not. My theology. I'm like my knowledge on theology has gotten worse over the years because I studied a little bit here and there like world history like when I was in high school, but that's kind of as deep dive into like religion and theology in general that I've ever really gotten. I've done some personal like looking into stuff but that's about it. So do forgive me like if my religious like purview is just kind of like so like minimal and skewed that you're like, no, that's completely wrong. I apologize. Either way, I'm very, very excited to see where the next episode takes us when we go back to present day in the next episode. It's going to definitely be interesting to see where things go, especially where we left off with Claire and Matthew and Peter. I just thought about that too, like, because I was like, oh, if Mark's in the system, it's like, well, his DNA, they were like checking the coin for DNA and stuff like that. So Mark might have left some DNA at that crime scene. Like I said, it could correlate and connect to that murder. Because I was like, oh, maybe he was already in the system for whatever reason, or if he gets arrested later on, that's going to be an issue. But I'm like, yeah, that might already be an issue. Like I said, that guy sinking his teeth in the Mark, I'm like, that's I can't help but, I was like, you can't ignore that. That's pretty significant, but we'll see if they end up pulling that thread, and I think they are. I think they're going to, because they made a point to show that. So, like I said, it depends on whether or not he was able to get some skin, but it seemed like he bit pretty deep, so. But either way, like I said, we'll wait to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.